Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Blackledge, and this is going to be our first lecture in our annelid phylum. What I told you a couple weeks ago is about to happen right now. We finished the mollusk chapter just a little bit ago, and we went from some really cool organisms, the squid and the octopus, that can change color, can change shape, and change skin texture, are super smart and have the best eyes. And now we're going back to our third and final worm group. So it's going to seem as if we're going backwards, but in just a few slides, you're going to see why the worm, why the phylum Annelida is actually a little teeny tiny bit more complex than the mollusca phylum. As you know, I like to start off with some jokes sometimes, so I hope you appreciate the comic on the first slide. Moving to the very beginning of our general characteristics, we are keeping the closed circulatory system that we found at the end of the mollusca phylum. In our cephalopod class, if you remember back to that, we had our cephalopods, the octopus, the squid, and the nautilus, that were awesome predators, moved really fast, had great speeds, jet propulsion, really good predators, and they needed a closed circulatory system in order to provide direct delivery of oxygen and nutrients to their muscles. And we're keeping that. We are not losing the closed circulatory system here. So even the earthworm, who might seem a little bit simple, has direct blood vessels. They are going to have capillaries, where they're going to have a structure that makes up kind of a heart, and they actually have a dorsal and ventral blood vessel. So we're keeping that general characteristic. They are bilaterally symmetrical, so they have a top, bottom, front, back, left, and right. So we have not lost that characteristic either. And they are true coelomates. So they are going to have a body cavity that is lined with the correct amount of mesoderm. If you take a look at the bottom picture, you'll see a cross section. So if we were to take a worm, cut it in half, you'll see all of this empty white space. That's the body cavity. And that pink lining on the inside of the body cavity is going to be their coelom. That pink is representing their mesoderm. And they also have these little poles right here, these mesenteries, and they're going to be like support beams. We've talked about mesenteries before, and I've described them as those poles in your basement or your house that are the structural support walls or beams of your house that you cannot get rid of. And that's what that's going to provide, a kind of a structural support beam for this organism. Keeping on with the general characteristics, most of the organisms in this phylum are going to have specialized structures on the outside called setae, except the leeches. And that is going to be an example of form fits function to us when we get to the leech organism. But as you can see, this is a little glimpse, this picture here, from the inside and outside of the organism. And it's literally like a little hair-like structure. If you were to take an earthworm and rub your finger on the bottom side of it, you'll actually feel it's going to feel kind of like stubble. And they have setae, depending upon the organism. Some have more, some have less. But what it's going to do is it's going to anchor the animal when they're moving. So it's going to kind of act like a braking system in a way, so that the animal can stop. It's going to prevent slipping for the organism. In some organisms that are your swimmers, they're going to help in swimming. And most importantly, as you can kind of see represented by the picture over here, it's going to prevent them from getting pulled out of their home. It's not 100% effective. The bird oftentimes does win, but it can actually maybe kind of frustrate the bird, as we've seen before. You know, the setae is not going to prevent the bird from pulling it out, but it might frustrate the bird to where the bird moves on to something that's a little easier to get. So the setae are going to be very important for most of our annelids, except the leeches. The leech class does not have the setae. And this is the final slide, or the main slide, that is going to explain why annelids are more complex than mollusks. We finally have our big characteristic called metamerism. We've worked through and we've gotten cephalization throughout the past couple chapters. We've gotten symmetry, bilateral symmetry throughout the past couple chapters. We've gotten the correct body cavity along the way. And this is our final of our 4 big key characteristics we talked about way back in August. Metamerism is the organism is going to be divided up into segments called metameres or somites. Might not seem like a huge characteristic. Let's talk first, before we get into the reasons why it's important, let's talk first about how this worm proves that it is segmented. The segments on an earthworm are linearly arranged. It's very repetitive. And you can see on the outside kind of grooves or indentations, rings maybe. So if you take a look up in the actual worm picture up at the top, you'll see these little lines on the outside, these little ribbed lines. That proves to you that the organism is segmented. That's actually called an annuli, those ridges. If you look down here, it kind of looks like it's a little bit of an indent. Right here, follow my arrow. There's one annuli, here's another annuli, and here's another one. And this is actually the characteristic that this entire phylum is named for. It's named for the presence of those outside lines or marks called annuli. Now, the outside is going to be segmented through these annuli. So here's one annuli, here's another annuli, and from one annuli to the next, that is one segment. So in this field of view right here, you'll see 1, 2, 3 complete segments. This one does not count. The anteriormost segment does not count. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Also on the inside, it is segmented. The organism on the inside has thin curtain of connective tissue called septa or septum, and that's going to divide the inside of the animal. So if you look at this colored picture down below, you'll see the annuli on the outside. Follow the arrow down. There's that little white layer right there. That is a septum. The next annuli, that's the septum. And then you go to the next one, and there is your septum. So they literally are tiny, tiny, thin layers of connective tissue membrane on the inside of the organism. And they correspond every time you have an annuli on the outside, you have a septum on the inside. Now, they're not impenetrable. They are penetrated by, as you can see, they're penetrated by the green, which is representing their digestive tract. They're penetrated by the yellow, which is represented by their nervous system, and their circulatory system, represented by the red kind of caging. So the organ systems do track and go from anterior to posterior end, and they are able to penetrate those septal walls. The importance of segmentation. It's going to enable the organism to be filled with fluid. Inside each segment, from septum to septum of the organism, it will be filled with a little bit of fluid. There's no internal bone structure, so they need a little bit of support, and that support's going to come from water. So as we've done before, you know skeleton means support, and if you break the word hydrostatic down, hydro refers to water. So there's going to be some fluid inside the organism in between each septum, and that's going to act as a force, a fluid in which muscles can act on. The most important reason why segmentation is important is it's going to allow for better body control. This organism is going to be able to move one part of its body, so let's take the anterior region, without moving the entire rest of the body. So it's going to save an awful lot of energy. As we've said, imagine walking, and every time you walk, all of the muscles of your body have to contract, almost like you're going through a spasm. This organism doesn't have to do that. It has precise control of their muscles and can move one muscle at a time, and therefore saving energy and having more efficient body movement. Their body plan, there is a beginning and an end. It is a very, very simple kind of system and body plan that the organism has. The anteriormost end is called the prostomium, the very, very, very tippy top. The prostomium, depending upon the lifestyle, and basically this boils down to what the animal eats, is going to be geared toward that. So in organisms that are predators, their prostomium will have jaws. In organisms that are not predators, maybe they are just going to eat dirt, they don't need a jaw. And then way down low, you have the pygidium, and that's the posteriormost end. In between, are all of their metameres or somites that are separated by their outer divisions that we learned about a couple slides ago called the annuli. As we've done before, we are going to go from the outside of the organism to the inside of the organism, kind of strip it down almost. So the animal is protected by a cuticle made of collagen. It is non-living. It's going to be just basically a protein that the animal is going to have. And underneath that is going to be their epidermis, their actual kind of first tissue layer. So the epidermis is going to be what secretes its collagen covering. After the epidermis, once you strip that down, if you take a look, you'll see the epidermis is this ring of cube-shaped cells. And then on the inside, you're going to see the muscles. We're getting very complex muscles. They have longitudinal muscles that go from anterior end to posterior end, and they have circular muscles that go ring-like around the organism. And those muscles, in conjunction with the hydrostatic skeleton, is going to allow lots of different movements. They can swim, they can burrow, they can crawl for all different reasons. So that is the end of our slideshow for the general characteristics. Your next installment is going to be talking about our classes. There are 3 classes of annelids that we're going to take a look at. We're going to look at the polychaetes, the oligochaetes, and the class of our leeches.